Hello and welcome to episode 13 of season 2 of Unlimited Opinions. I'm Adam Bishop.
I'm Mark Bishop.
We are continuing looking at world mythology, of course, and this time we are taking our first look at Greek mythology, starting with the tales of Troy. Now we did, as you mentioned when we tried to start just a second ago, we did take a week off last week because of various sicknesses.
Well, I mean, it was
just one sickness. Yeah.
Yeah, I had the dreaded coronavirus. I got Omicron.
You sure did.
Omicron. And it was a bad cold.
Mm-hmm.
Now I have a sinus infection.
Congratulations.
So I sound wonderful.
Yeah, you really do.
But yeah, on antibiotics, so I'll be just great for this podcast.
That's fantastic. I'm very glad to hear that.
So, Greek myths, and there's like an intro, and then there's a discussion of the tales of battles of Troy.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know how you want to handle this, because there are a lot of moving parts.
There are a lot of moving parts.
So we have not discussed this before the podcast came on. I don't know if you want to go through all of that, or what's your plan?
I kind of want to go through all of it.
All right.
I mean, that's the point of the podcast. We have unlimited opinions. Surely we could talk about everyone.
Well, there's so many stories out of the one story,
Mm-hmm.
the battle for Troy and all that.
Yeah.
So, all right, well, knock yourself out. I'll add some color commentary, I guess, from time to time.
Fantastic. Thank you.
Usually what we do.
Yes.
We do all the heavy lifting.
Yeah, so he kind of starts off, Jake Jackson, the author, with a pretty long introduction, longer than the introductions for any of the other sections, kind of talking about, the importance of Greek mythology. And he's very correct in saying that it's, definitely the most prevalent in our society. In our society, sure, yes. Yeah. Most well-known throughout pop culture, most taught often in schools and that sort of thing. He's kind of says it's for good reason. These are very good stories that, have been passed on a very long time. It's not for no particular reason.
Yeah. Well-developed stories with morality tales and all that stuff. So it was, a religion, really, initially. So it kind of has a lot going on.
Absolutely. And so he also kind of goes into the pantheon. We don't really have to talk about that too much, but what is important to note is that there are a lot of gods for just about anything, but there are a select major few that live, of course, on Mount Olympus. Those are the big head gods of kind of the big aspects of nature, I guess you could say. And those are the ones that pop up most often, and we'll see those.
Nature, including human nature.
Yes. There's I think there's 10 of them that we'll see most often.
I thought it was 12.
12? Could be 12. I might have just completely misspoken there.
I thought it was 12. Like the apostles.
You could be right.
I have to look it back up. Well, let's see. When we were reading No, it wasn't Artemis Fowl.
Percy Jackson.
Percy Jackson. Yeah, he had I recall those Greek references and God references.
Yes, of course. So the first story that is told is the Judgement of Paris, and this is kind of what leads into the whole of the story of Troy. So Troy was a city held in disdain by some of the gods, and their grudge was only relaxed by the good King Priam, who was a superstitious man, and when his wife Hecuba dreamed that her child was a firebrand, Priam left his youngest son out to die. This child was Paris, who was suckled by a bear and raised by herdsmen, and he lived with a mountain nymph Oenone, in a humble home. One day he was visited by the messenger god Hermes, who told him that Zeus had decreed that Paris was a man with great wisdom and fair looks, and he needed to judge which of the 3 loveliest goddesses is fairest. And so all 3 of these goddesses appeared to him, and the first to appear to him was Hera, queen of Olympus, who explained that Peleus and Thetis had married, and they were 2 gods, and only one immortal wasn't invited, Eris, who had shown up anyway, and thrown an apple at the 3 greatest goddesses, Hera, Athena, and Aphrodite, and on this apple was written, "For the fairest," of course causing a great argument between the 3 goddesses.
Right. It's kind of funny how this all starts out, where he's just minding his own business after, his dad tried to kill him, but they got suckled by a bear, and then he's minding his own business, married to a nymph, and then for some reason he's got to judge who's the fairest of these 3 goddesses.
Yeah, really kind of unfortunately dragged into this whole really family debate.
Yes.
And so the Hera then promised him her queenly gifts, including money and the richest land on earth if he chose her to be the fairest. Athena then appeared to him, offering him wisdom and success in battle. But Aphrodite then appeared to him, saying that he would be granted the fairest woman in all of the world if he proclaimed that she was the fairest. And so, of course, Paris chose Aphrodite, because what he wanted most was love, and she thanked him graciously, and he set off the next day for the games arranged by King Priam to commemorate his youngest son's death. And so the end of this first sort of section of the story ends with Paris going to the memorial for himself in his city that his father kicked him out of as a child, which is kind of ironic.
Right. And then when his dad finds out he's alive, he says, "Oh, that's great."
Mm-hmm.
Like, well, that's interesting. Didn't bother to check on him while he's being suckled by a bear.
Yes. I don't know, maybe he just assumed he'd be all right, but I guess he kind of...
I think
he kind of wanted him to die, yes, was the unfortunate thing.
And his wife was right, because if he would have died, it would have prevented a lot of calamity.
Yes. A self-fulfilling prophecy. You try to avoid it, and you just cause it to happen.
Yeah. Ooh.
So the next section of the story is about Helen in Paris. And Helen was the daughter of Leda and Tyndareus, king of Sparta, and she was the most beautiful woman in all of Greece, and she attracted many suitors. Tyndareus then chose the wealthiest suitor, Menelaus, to marry her, and so Menelaus became king of Sparta, and Tyndareus provided an offering to the gods, but he forgot Aphrodite, which was a terrible oversight.
Yes.
Helen then gave birth to 3 children, and one day Paris happened to come upon Sparta by the will of the fates, and he decided that he would have Helen as his wife, and he called upon Aphrodite to fulfill her promise, and soon Helen eloped with Paris. They sailed idly for months with treasure stolen from Menelaus' palace, and they eventually turned towards Troy. On the journey, the sea grew calm, and a terrible creature with a trident boarded the ship. And this was Nereus, god of the sea, who proclaimed that the Spartans would seek revenge, and Troy would be laid low. Paris, still full of pride and love, continued to Troy. And so this little segment here is really kind of the deciding event that sets everything into motion. Paris sees the most beautiful woman, and he decides this is going to be the woman he's going to marry. And of course, she actually willingly elopes with him. It's kind of, does she really want to go with him, or is she kind of being forced to? But she does confirm later that she did go willingly with Paris. So it's not like she's being forced to, but this is like the whole big event that sets everything into motion that eventually leads to this great battle of Troy.
Makes you wonder what she looked like.
I guess pretty good, if I had to guess.
I wonder if it was her personality.
So then we move on to the Siege of War. Menelaus and his brother Agamemnon, who will both be very big figures throughout the rest of the Battle of Troy, then called upon all of the strongest warriors in the land to begin for the war upon Troy. And one of these men was Odysseus, who had recently married Penelope and had his son Telemachus. He was unwilling to fight in a war which was predicted to separate him from his family for 20 years, and so he disguised himself as a farmer and began plowing his field with an ox. Menelaus and Palamedes then came to Odysseus, and Palamedes was not fooled by this disguise, laying Telemachus down in the plow's path, and Odysseus admitted his deceit, saving his son and reluctantly traveling to Troy, where he would be known as the most distinguished warrior of all time. Achilles was also summoned, who was the youngest son of Thetis, who had all of her previous children killed in the pursuit of immortality, but she had succeeded with Achilles, holding him by his heel in the river Styx, making him invulnerable except for the one patch where her hand held him on the heel. His mother, then wary of the Battle of Troy, disguised him as a woman to avoid the war, but Odysseus saw through the disguise, laying out jewelry which excited all the other women around him, but not Achilles, and then laying out a dagger and shield, which only excited him, and then his disguise was revealed, and he came readily with Odysseus. You're laughing very much at that, that little trick that was pulled.
The first one, that Odysseus is trying to act like he's crazy, and then the other guy is doing a Corporal Klinger thing from MASH. I don't know if you're familiar with that reference, but he always wanted to get out of the TV series MASH.
Yes, I'm aware of MASH.
Klinger would dress as a woman, trying to get kicked out of the army for being a cross-dresser.
Really?
Yeah. That's pretty funny.
Didn't know that.
And so his commanding officer cleverly saw through the ruse and just allowed him to wear a dress while on duty. It was just kind of a running gag. So,
that's pretty good.
Evidently he was inspired by this Greek story. Trying to get out of the armed service.
Yes.
One by trying to say he's crazy, the other one dressing like a lady.
So Odysseus then journeyed to Troy with Palamedes and Menelaus to meet with King Priam, And King Priam was dismayed to hear of Paris, but he did not want to judge his son before he made his case, and so sent the Spartans away, because Paris had of course not arrived back at Troy yet. And when Paris did arrive, Priam was smitten by Helen's beauty and forgave Paris's weakness, bidding Helen stay forever. But the people of Troy were very angry with Helen and the war that she was undoubtedly bringing with her. So this is kind of very unfortunate for all these poor people just living here. Just the king and the prince just decided that this woman is going to stay with them, that they somewhat kidnapped from the Spartans, which is not a good move. And so some years passed since Menelaus had called for aid, and now a large host of warriors set out for Troy, but deathly stillness suddenly came upon their ships. The goddess Artemis had caused this stillness, for Agamemnon had unwittingly slayed one of her sacred hind, and she demanded the death of his daughter Iphigenia, but Agamemnon refused to consider this. But over time his men became increasingly angry with the lack of movement to Troy. At last, encouraged by his men and Menelaus, Agamemnon had his wife Clytemnestra bring Iphigenia to the ships under the guise of marrying her to Achilles. Clytemnestra grew suspicious, and she went to Achilles, and learning that he had no knowledge of a wedding, she flew back to her husband, finding Iphigenia crying at his feet. As Agamemnon struggled to make a decision, Iphigenia then proclaimed that she would willingly die, and the fall of Troy would be her wedding feast, and she laid herself down on the altar of Artemis, where the seer Calchas prepared to kill her. As Calchas raised his arm, Iphigenia disappeared, as Artemis pitied the girl and brought her away to be a priestess of her temple, and Calchas proclaimed Artemis to be appeased. The winds then grow, carrying the warriors to Troy. So that is the last section that sets up the actual battle, and then after that, the battle actually begins. And it is interesting how Iphigenia just kind of whisked away before, she's sacrificed, because, in Greek mythology, it's a big deal that Artemis has her whole host of warrior women that she has with her, the huntresses. So I think she became one of the huntresses.
I guess so.
Yes.
Kind of similar to Abraham.
Mm-hmm. I was going to mention the same thing.
One of the things I struggle with.
Yes.
But, another one of these kind of like the gods putting somebody in an impossible position and then at the very end saying, never mind.
Yeah. Basically.
Well, you passed the test.
Mm-hmm. There's a lot of that. The gods just getting very angry at one particular thing, and then they'll help the other person or demand this or that and that sort of thing.
And say, maybe I rushed to judgment.
Yes. Another thing that I kind of thought of is this is kind of the Ancient Greek Avengers, really. It's they're gathering all of these really mighty heroes and stuff, right. And of course they would have their own individual stories. Right. I think we'll talk about Odysseus's journeys in the next episode, but we'll see all of these heroes kind of have their own part to tell in various other places, and so it's very interesting that they're all kind of brought together for this one big battle.
Like a super battle.
Yes, exactly.
That's a good analogy.
Well, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
So now we actually get to the Trojan War. And there are a lot of moving parts, so feel free to interrupt at any time, because there's a lot of very small episodes that kind of take place within this great battle.
One after another.
Mm-hmm. The war began badly, with Achilles killing Tenes, a son of Apollo, for throwing rocks at the Greek ships, despite being warned to never kill a child of Apollo. Then the marksman Philoctetes was bitten by a snake, causing an infection, and he was left abandoned on the island off Lemnos for many years.
Makes an appearance later, though.
Yes, he does. And both of those events are very important later, so it's very recurring characters in here. So upon coming to Troy, one of the greatest young Greeks, Protosclaus, leapt ashore and was immediately killed by Hector, King Priam's oldest son, who will be a very important figure and kind of the leader of the Trojans throughout the rest of the war. Zeus decreed that mankind must be depleted, and so the gods also became involved in the war, them taking sides on either side of the battle.
Yikes.
And so it's actually interesting in the story of the Iliad here is that it starts in the 10th year of the war. Mm-hmm. And so everything else that we get about the war is that it's all given in flashbacks. And so we don't get anything except at the 10th year of the war. So it's actually the very last year. It's very interesting how it starts in the middle of the action, right at kind of the climax of events rather than actually at the beginning.
Yeah, true.
And so it's right at this point that the Iliad, our source for this story, actually begins. Because for 9 years, the Greeks had been fighting the impenetrable walls of Troy, which were built by the gods Apollo and Poseidon, and could not be destroyed or scaled, and were defended by men like Hector, Paris, Antenor, and Aeneas, and many warriors besides them. Therefore, the Greeks attacked the allies of Troy, burning and looting cities and raping women, which is very lovely. Achilles and his men attacked the city of Lyrnessus, Achilles taking the woman Briseis and Agamemnon taking Chryseis, who was revealed to be a priestess of Apollo and promptly returned to the temple.
Yeah, whoops.
Yeah. And so Agamemnon then stole Briseis from Achilles. Achilles was enraged and threw down his armor, swearing to no longer fight, and his absence hurt the Greeks greatly, as he was their best fighter. Hector then came to the Greeks, suggesting that Menelaus and Paris fight a duel between the two for Helen, and they did so, and Menelaus eventually bested Paris, pinning him against the walls of Troy. However, Aphrodite intervened, hiding Paris in a cloud and lifting him to safety behind the walls, and Hector cursed the gods. Excuse me, not Hector. Hector would not curse the gods. Menelaus cursed the gods, of course. Hector would be very happy about this. Yes. He would not be cursing the gods. Apollo aided the Trojans, and Zeus aided the Greeks, and Apollo encouraged the Trojans to burn the Greek fleet. But Achilles' friend Patroclus appeared in Achilles' armor in the midst of the burning, frightening the Trojans away, because they were all deathly terrified of Achilles' return. Patroclus then leapt atop the Trojan walls, but Apollo intervened again, winding him and knocking away his sword and shield, and Hector killed him with a single blow. Word of Patroclus' death reached Achilles, and he summoned new armor, rushing into battle. The gods intervened again, the river god of the Scamander holding back Achilles with a wall of water, but Hephaestus then dried it, allowing Achilles to continue pursuing Hector and killing all in his path.
Slaughtering
Which is,
all.
yes. So you have one god intervening, the river god of the Scamander, bringing up this wall of water, and then Hephaestus, the god of the forge, then aiding Achilles and drying the water. And so it's just this back and forth of the gods really not accomplishing anything ever.
Right. Other than the death of the humans.
Yes, exactly. So then Achilles chased Hector around the walls of Troy 3 times, finally pinning Hector to the wall and killing him.
Yay!
I always thought this was really funny. We learned about this. I took an elementary Latin class this past semester, and so part of our textbook talks about the Trojan War, because, that's a big deal in, Latin literature with the Aeneid. And that sort of thing. And it's just really funny how they just go in circles 3 times around this massive city before Achilles, I guess.
Finally catches him.
I wonder if they tried to do the thing when you run back the other way and try to get him.
Can't catch me.
Catch me. Maybe that's what he eventually did. He couldn't catch him the 3 times, so he ran the other direction. And so the Trojans mourned for their dead leader, and many of their allies were killed by Achilles. Penthesilea brought her Amazon women, but she was killed mercilessly. The politician Thersites was killed by Achilles' fist, and Memnon arrived with Ethiopian troops. But Zeus gave Achilles a sword to kill him, and he did so. And when Memnon died, all his followers turned to birds. Yeah. So the Trojans are not getting any help here, because as soon as they step foot on shore, they're basically immediately killed. Yep. And so Achilles then boasted his prowess, and the gods grew very impatient of him. And so, because he's just bragging here about everything that he's done.
Killing everybody. I'm unstoppable.
And so, and so then Apollo says, "Oh yeah," and then repays him for the death of Tenes. Remember that at the very beginning of the war, guiding the hand of Paris to loose an arrow, which went right into Achilles' heel, killing him instantly. The Greeks were weakened and mourned, but they soon decided who should take on the armor of Achilles, and Agamemnon chose Odysseus over the stronger Ajax. Ajax was furious and set out to kill Odysseus, but Athena intervened, convincing him that he was killing Odysseus' men, but he was really slaughtering a flock of sheep. And when he realized this, Ajax took his own life, convinced of his own madness. Which really kind of sucks for Ajax, right. Yeah. He's this really great warrior who has his own stories about him, of course, because, it's the Ancient Greek Avengers. Yeah. And so he's really upset that he's not chosen, so he wants to kill Odysseus, but then he's just convinced that he's crazy and kills himself. It's very, very sad. Yeah. Zeus then decreed that Troy must fall, but only with Heracles' bow and arrows, and Achilles' son Neoptolemus, and the Greeks must remove the Palladium, a wooden statue that kept the city safe. Philoctetes was then rescued from Lemnos, that guy who was abandoned on the island, and he had been training for years to use Heracles' bow, and so he shot a poisoned arrow into Paris' neck, killing him instantly. So now we kind of have all of the major players just about dead. Yep. We have Achilles and Hector and Paris, which are really the major leaders on both sides of the battle. Oh, well, no. I just dropped my notebook. It's a tragedy. Neoptolemus was then dressed in his father's armor, and he led the army to Troy, while Odysseus, with the help of Athena and Diomedes, disguised himself as a beggar, entered Troy, and stole the palladium through the city's sewers. Odysseus then came up with a plan to finally end the war. A wooden horse was made in which 50 warriors could be held. Agamemnon then gathered up the fleet to seem as though the Greeks were leaving, and Sinon was left behind on land. Sinon was captured by the Trojans, feigning anger that he had been left behind, and he persuaded them to take the horse into Troy, for the horse was designed to appear as an offering to Athena for a safe journey home. Cassandra and the prophet Laocoon proclaimed that the horse was a trap, but Laocoon was strangled by serpents in the sea,
Yikes.
and the horse was brought into the city. This is actually a neat little segment that's not really talked about much in the book, but we talked about this in my Latin class. Laocoon is the priest of Troy, and Cassandra is also this prophet. Yeah. They're both like, this is obviously a trap.
Right.
And so they're kind of standing there on the shore looking at this big wooden horse as the Greeks are leaving. And so they're all kind of facing the other direction, and Laocoon kind of walks away, and just this big old monster just comes out of the ocean and just eats him. And he's just gone. And they don't think anything of it. Like, this guy just warned them of this great trap, and he's just killed instantly. And it's very, very surprising that they're like, maybe we should think about the giant monster that just ate this dude. But no, they bring the big old horse into the city. And so the Trojans feasted that night, but Helen was suspicious and called out to the horse in the night in the voices of the wives of the men inside. But Odysseus saw through the trick, and he held his hand over the mouth of each hero as the voice of their wife called out, and Helen finally went away. Which is kind of funny that they...
He's going from one to the other.
Yes, every single one of them, he has to tell them to be quiet as she's trying the same trick with all of them.
You'd think by the 49th one, they would have figured it out. Oh, man, that's not my wife. But she's a woman of 50 voices.
I guess so.
She's 51. Maybe.
It's also impressive that she knew the voices of all of these men's wives.
Right. You would think she would just call them names.
Yeah, you would think.
Hey, Joe. What? I mean, she knows who's in there.
I guess so, yeah.
Can't she just tell the names to the... Look, I know there's 50 dudes in there. I not only know who their names are, I know their wives' names, and I can give you a perfect impression of how their wives speak. I'm telling you, there's 50 guys in this horse. You fools! Light it on fire or something. Nope. No, we're just gonna get drunk and party all night long because the war's over. We won. So she said, "Oh, honey, it's your sweetums." Oh, it's not that one. Oh, honey, it's your sweetums. 50 times. And then she just gets fed up and goes back to the house. I'm going to bed.
You can't say she didn't try it.
Yeah. Why didn't she just light it on fire?
That's a good question.
She's out there giving 50 impressions, perfect impressions of these guys' wives. Why don't you just light the damn thing on fire? It's made out of wood. They're all going to die in there. If nothing else, smoke inhalation.
Oh my God. That's an excellent point.
Oh, thank you.
And so the Trojans became very drunk. And so the Greeks exited the horse, and all the Trojans were soon massacred.
Yeah, slaughtered.
King Priam was killed, and Menelaus came to Helen, and she spoke words of such regret that Menelaus immediately forgave her, and he welcomed her back to the Greeks.
But honey, I love you. Okay.
Yeah, it's actually a neat little sort of linguistic thing that I'm going to talk about here, but in Virgil's Aeneid, which takes place kind of as Troy is falling, and it follows Aeneas, who I briefly mentioned earlier.
Is it Aeneas?
Aeneas.
Is it?
I don't know.
Well, I know Aeneas Williams, who is a defensive player for the Rams. So that's how
maybe that's how you pronounce it in English, but in Latin it's Aeneas.
All right, very good.
And so, in Latin, there's two kinds of ways to say the past tense, and we kind of have the same thing. He was carrying implies that it could still be happening, but if you say he carried, that's final. It's not happening. And Latin kind of has that. And so in the middle of the night, as all these Greeks are coming out and slaughtering and burning and destroying everything, there's just confusion. And Aeneas is kind of looking around. He's like, what do I do? And this one dude just walks past him and he just says, Troius fuit, which in Latin just means Troy was. It's final. It's not Troy was happening. It's not still existing. It's final. It's done. It's not going to happen again, which is a neat bit of, language usage there.
Yes.
And so Cassandra was taken by Agamemnon, and Neoptolemus took Hector's widow Andromache, and Polyxena was sacrificed at Achilles' tomb to appease his ghost. And Aeneas was wounded fatally, but the gods healed him, with Poseidon prophesying he would one day rule Troy. And Aeneas fled Troy, his journeys being told in Virgil's Aeneid. Queen Hecabe then watched the massacre, and when Odysseus came to take her as his own, she was transformed into a dog, whose bark would be heard on the shores of Troy forever. Troy was destroyed, and Helen returned to Sparta with Menelaus, and the story of Troy was a warning to lovers and men of war, which would be remembered for all time. And that is the full story of the Trojan War, just about. Very briefly.
Excellent job, Adam.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
Yes. So what's the overall lesson?
The overall lesson, don't steal dudes' wives, I guess, is the lesson.
Yes. Although the wife didn't seem to have a bad time of it.
No, everything turned out fine for her.
They enjoyed a nice cruise for a while.
They did.
As they sailed upon the Mediterranean, I suppose. And then she was, very happy with him. And during the war, evidently, when the war's over, she just went back home.
And it's really kind of a depressing story. Really, everything ends up being futile.
It was all destroyed
in the end. Yeah. Well, I mean, not even that. It's just when one god helps somebody, the other god just intervenes. And when you kill one person on one side, then your leader's killed, and it's just nothing is ever accomplished. They go on basically in a stalemate for 10 years is what happens. They can't besiege Troy. And kind of what happens that's not mentioned in the book, but the Greeks themselves, because they're there for so long, they build their own fortress around where they're camped. And so then the Trojans are attacking the walls of the Greeks, and the Greeks are attacking the walls of the Trojans, and it's just back and forth, and nothing ever happens.
Yeah. Probably a fairly accurate description of war.
Probably one of the most accurate in mythology,
Right.
So that's how long wars would take. One single battle would last 10 years because nothing is ever really happening.
Well, the siege warfare, too. That takes a long time. And depending on the availability of men and the growing season, all that kind of stuff, I mean, you may not be in a constant state of war, meaning you're fighting every day, but you have, fighting seasons. I mean, you still have to raise your crops and all that kind of stuff, so maybe they're more off and on it. But
like the Siege of Gondor in The Lord of the Rings.
The Siege of Gondor?
The Siege of Gondor.
Well, how long did that take?
Forever. It was going on for some years by the time of the Lord of the Rings happened.
Oh, is that right?
Yeah, because, Sauron was building his armies in Mordor, and of course, we see in the movies, especially, Osgiliath being overrun. That's the city, like, on the river. And so what happens in Osgiliath is, half of it's controlled by the orcs and half of it's controlled by the Gondorians, the good men. And it's just nothing really ever happens. They're just sitting there at a complete stalemate. And there's other cities, further up the river that are kind of at the same position. Nothing can ever really happen until one day the orcs come over in the middle of the night and overwhelm the Gondorians, and they go back to Minas Tirith, the capital of Gondor. And then Denethor, of course, foolishly sends his son out again, basically to die, and that happens and everything. It's really just very demoralizing form of warfare, is to just sit there knowing that the enemy's right over there and you can't do anything about it, ever.
Right. Yeah, that's the state of war for much of human history. It's just the more recent battles where you have it on an industrial scale, you can do it by distance, is less common in human history, because siege warfare was a thing for centuries and centuries.
I mean, that's kind of what the message of the Trojan War was for a long time. This is the war. This is how war is for the most part. Right. This is what to expect if you go to war, especially over something that's relatively as trivial as a woman.
Right.
And this is what happens, and maybe you shouldn't do war.
Yeah. And then the twists of fate, the different little mistakes that people make that affect the outcome and all that, and then the hubris, where people get greedy or careless or whatever, and then they suffer the consequences. It's fascinating.
What's interesting is there's no protagonist. There's no hero in this story, I don't think.
That's true. Yeah.
There's nobody that's really better than anybody else.
Except for the lady who warned everybody.
Yes. Yes. Laocoon and Cassandra did pretty good. But
kill that one. He's going to be trouble. And they didn't kill him. Yeah. And sent him off, and he's nursed by a bear or whatever.
Oh, you're talking about the queen.
Yes.
Hecuba. Yeah.
Right, yeah. Yes. And then, hey, that horse is not supposed to come in here.
Yeah.
Shut up, woman.
But it is interesting, how all these, storylines are kind of interwoven. Everybody has basically their own prophecy.
Right.
Everybody's going to be doomed to die some certain way, or everybody's going to
Yes.
do some certain big thing, and every person really has a major part to play, which is kind of interesting.
Yeah.
For something of this scale, you have so many different characters. How do you really wrap that all together in one
Right.
big story?
Yeah, it's a great
impressive.
storyteller. Yeah, true.
All written by one guy, Homer. Actually, I don't think we've mentioned Homer wrote the Iliad and the Odyssey, which we'll talk about next time.
Yep.
Odysseus' travels. I think I mentioned that earlier. But yeah, it's very impressive that you're wrapping all these big mythological figures into one cohesive narrative. And maybe he didn't write every individual section of the story, but he at least did put it all together into one big thing.
One big epic poem.
Yes, it's very epic.
Can something be very epic? I don't know.
No, we're not doing that again. No. It's the fascinating discussion all over again.
It's very fascinating.
Yeah.
It's most entertaining. What?
Do you have any other final comments on the story of the Trojan War?
No, very good, very good. Much more entertaining than the Lord of the Rings, which is we just rewatched that movie recently. So.
That's the first one.
First,
The Fellowship of the Ring.
Fellowship of the Ring.
Yes. Very good movie.
Oh,
Excellent movie.
Sam. Oh, Sam.
You hate Elijah Wood.
I do.
Yes.
Well, I don't know. I mean, that guy might be a great guy,
But as Frodo, you do not like him.
right. And I think the directing of him is awful.
Really?
Yeah, because the director should have said, you know what? Try to be a little less effeminate.
I think
Oh, Sam.
what they're kind of really trying to go for is, more ethereal, more elven than the other hobbits. 'Cause that's kind of what Frodo...
Elven?
Yes.
What do you mean, elven?
Like more like the elves.
Oh, elvish.
Yeah, sure.
Elven?
Elven? I don't think there's anything wrong with that.
All right.
Elvish, sure. Elvish than the other hobbits because, he's grown up with Bilbo and, he's learned all of these elf languages and, he's slightly more detached from reality than the others.
Yeah.
And he only kind of progressively gets more and more ethereal as time goes on
Yeah. All right. Fair enough.
because of his, connection with the ring.
Yeah. But but Sam, oh, Mr. Frodo.
Yeah. I don't know what point you were trying to make there. That is something that Sam says, yeah.
Repeatedly.
Yes.
Oh, Mr. Frodo.
Well, he's his gardener. Frodo's kind of his boss, his master.
I guess, but
Well, it's more prominent in the books. He specifically calls him Master Frodo in the books.
that'd be better.
Really?
Yeah, it'd be better than the friends. Because why is he calling him Mr. Frodo, but they're buddies? They're like equals in the movie.
Well, according to Sean Astin, Sam's actor, he did call him Master Frodo kind of interchangeably. But I guess in the editing process, they cut out every take where he said Master instead of Mr. So now it's just Mr. in the movies, which is interesting.
That's weird.
I don't know why they would do that.
Oh, don't know.
Thank you for your comments. I appreciate that.
No, it's a good story. I like these myths, and I was wondering how they're going to summarize it.
Yeah,
and try to
'cause, I mean,
they did a good job of summarizing it, but getting the overall story arc in there.
Mm-hmm. So we can just look forward to more of that, but about Odysseus next time.
Yep, sounds good.
So this was episode 13 of season 2 of Unlimited Opinions.
Oh, wait a second.
Oh,
We forgot about the t-shirt contest.
yes.
Well, we forgot to look up the status of the delivery.
Oh, I looked it up the other day.
Okay.
It left Chicago, so
Oh.
it's heading to its destination.
So is it going straight from Chicago to the other country?
I believe so.
Huh.
So I think it's heading from a Chicago airport. It might have actually arrived in the country by now, but
Right.
I know that it has.
Are we not going to identify the country?
We're not going to identify the
Because
country.
we don't want to identify our one fan.
Yes. Yes, we can identify him by name. He said that was all right. It's,
Okay.
Richard
But not
Emerson.
location.
Yes,
What's
not
his name?
Richard Emerson.
Richard Emerson.
Richard
So
Emerson.
maybe
He has a podcast of his own, actually, that I've listened to. It's pretty good.
Is that right?
Yes. The Ancient World podcast. I've listened to a few episodes. I recommend it.
To our other listener, I guess.
Yes, to the other one. Yes. I highly recommend to the Ancient World podcast hosted by Richard.
So he was the winner because he made the one and only comment upon our Twitter feed.
So he made several comments.
Well,
but he was the only one who commented.
yeah,
Yes, so he won.
He tied himself.
But if anybody else wants to tweet it, I think we'll be making another.
We have to determine our next contest for season 2, because that's
season
really
2,
the season 1 contest.
Yes.
Which
Well,
took,
I can tweet out a picture of the shirts actually, because they do say season 1 on them, so presumably we will have a season 2 shirt.
Right.
And so the design for the shirts is, we have a slightly different logo, Unlimited Opinions, season 1, kind of on the chest area, and then on the back it says, "Your opinion is wrong, Mark Bishop."
Yes, that's right.
So it's got a beautiful quote on the back.
Inspirational.
Yes, inspirational, truly uplifting. So we'll see what we can do for season 2.
Yeah, season 2. We'll have to have another contest.
We will have to have another contest.
What are the rules? We think about that.
Probably the same thing.
No. We
No?
have to have a bit different. We have to have a secret code that they have to tweet at us.
Do we want anyone to win?
Well, the secret code would be, your podcast sucks. So as soon as someone says that, they win. And we'll announce that they got the secret code right.
I actually really like that. The first person to tweet at us, "Your podcast sucks," wins.
Or a similar sentiment.
Yes.
It has to be, it doesn't have to be a direct quote, but if they assert that our podcast is awful or sucks or whatever,
Yes, they win a
free
t-shirt.
t-shirt.
Yes.
Now, we may not be able to get them to give us their address. Unless they actually listen to this and know it's how you win.
Your podcast sucks, and I'm going to immediately DM them on Twitter, "What's your address?"
And I think that should be the quote on the back of the t-shirt, which would be, "This podcast sucks," and have it as quoted by the winner. We'll send them a t-shirt.
That's actually an amazing idea. I really like that.
All right, so that's the contest for season 2.
Yes.
And once you win the t-shirt contest, you can't win again.
Okay, that's fair.
You're ineligible.
Yes. So Richard, I hate to disappoint, but unfortunately you cannot win this
Now
season
he can
2.
order one, maybe.
Maybe, yes, if we ever find out a way to sell these. Because we have extras of season 1, by the way.
I know. I ordered a bunch of them.
Well, I know. I was telling our listener,
okay.
not you. Of course you know.
Looking at me.
No.
You're talking to me.
Well, I'm talking to you.
I was
But
like,
there's
I know.
something.
I ordered them. I paid for them. Why are you telling me this? Well, if we charge enough, we can make a profit.
Yes, this podcast has only been costs to you.
That is
because it charges monthly for publishing these and all of that. And you
Yes.
paid for the shirts, so huge deficit. Not monetizable.
worth every penny.
Sure.
Just to entertain my fan.
Yes. But this has been episode 13 of season 2 of Unlimited Opinions. I've been Adam Bishop.
Still Mark.
Good night, yes. I'm looking forward to seeing the next winner.
Yes. That will be fun.
That would be actually great. If somebody just genuinely does not like the podcast and then I ask for their address, that would be great.
Well, first you have to tell them congratulations.
Yes, congratulations. You won. Give me your address.